Have you ever wondered how education can be the key to managing a deadly disease like rabies? Stay tuned as we uncover the powerful work being done by Khula Outreach in partnership with KZN State National Veterinary Department. Welcome back to the second part of the Paws Effect podcast. In this segment, we dive into an equally critical aspect of Dr. Charlotte's work, and that's with Khula Outreach. They've partnered with KZN State Veterinary Department to help combat rabies through education and vaccination campaigns. Rabies remains a significant concern, and education plays a pivotal role in its management. Let's explore how Khula Outreach is making a meaningful impact on rabies control and public awareness. Charlotte, in part one, we had the opportunity to talk about the first part of your business, which is the bespoke veterinary training. There is another part to what you do, and that's Khula Outreach, which is really exciting, and I can't wait to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so Khula Outreach is probably like our most inspiring part of what we do, and it started in 2021. And basically, when I was still working for a small animal nutrition company, I was a sales rep here in Natal. One of the vets that I used to start interacting with was Dr. Peter Howe, and we became good mates. And then I started joining him on some of these rabies vaccination drives he was doing. And basically, Pete would go on his motorbike into the Ananda Valley and vaccinate dogs for rabies.
How did that start for him?
So rabies is a massive issue. So rabies is a virus that is endemic in certain animal populations, like jackals and mongooses, but it's, that has its natural sort of ebb and flows in those cycles or, animal populations. And then you have the rabies that dogs and cats can get. And the problem is that is at an all-time high. So COVID made it even worse because then all the veterinary services came to a grinding halt. And so specifically in your high-risk provinces, KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape, and also obviously by Kruger, etc., that area there. It's all over South Africa, but these are basically the provinces where it's like state of crisis type of thing. And the general public's not aware of it. They sort of think that it's a rural issue or a poor person's issue, and so we have this breakdown in animals receiving the rabies vaccinations.
So we're talking owned pet.
Yes, and obviously rural. So coming back to what Pete was doing, Pete obviously saw a massive need and he was very passionate about it, and so he would go on his motorbike and vaccinate. Then he started doing them on a slightly larger scale, where he'd partner with different sort of welfare organizations or community members, and then they would almost call everyone on a Sunday. And you have kids like literally walking for kilometers, bringing their little dogs, their cats, and like the most hilarious things, like an orange narky sack, or I don't know.
You've seen a lot.
Seen a lot. Anyway, so So then I started joining, and I'd bring all the dog food as like a bit of an incentive for people to come. And then in 2020, end of 2020, when we started Khula, I was like, Pete, let's do this on a bigger scale. And he was like, oh no, come on. And he was like, really? And I was like, let's get the OP vet students here with us. Let's get sponsorship.
Many hands.
And, we're obviously going to vaccinate more animals, but then we're going to teach the vet students about what's actually going on and get them involved as well. So we can hopefully get this ripple effect when it comes to rabies management. And then Pete very tragically passed away in a motorbike accident, end of 2020. And so we did one outreach together where Khula, like the Khula banner and the Amageza logo banner. So Amageza was Pete's welfare organization, pretty informal. It was basically Pete and his motorbike. That was Amageza.
But he was
dog
passionate
welfare.
about welfare.
Yeah, he was super passionate about it, and he'd speak to them in his like version of Xhosa and Zulu and English, and he was getting the job done. And it was amazing because Ananda's rabies cases had actually started to decline. So of dogs and cats testing positive for rabies had started to decline. So he was definitely making an impact. And so, do I wish that Pete could have been part of Khula Outreach like we'd envisioned? Absolutely. But it's continuing in his memory, and we've got amazing colleagues joining us, on this venture, and it's just growing. So next year, 2024, we now have 60 OP students joining us, and we've now got the backing. So the two industry partners are Hills Pet Nutrition and Boehringer Ingelheim, and they've been, it's fully sponsored. So the students, all they have to do is get themselves from Onderstepoort to us and back. So that's amazing because it's very inclusive
incredible.
then. And so everyone, doesn't matter what your background is, how much pocket money you get, you can come. And then we've made it, so yes, rabies is the main focus, but we've also added in some private practice experience. So they go to various, Hillcrest Vet had them, and we often come to you guys for a bit of experience. And so they get a bit of a taste of what 24-hour practices are like, interact with some private practice vets. I then sit with them at the SPCA, and we castrate welfare dogs, so strays, and we're all scrubbed up and gowned and doing it the OP way, but helping from a welfare perspective, so that's good. So we do castrations and we help them improve their tissue handling, and obviously that's the part that they really enjoy because they want to get more surgeries under the belt. And then they get product training from Hills and Boehringer Ingelheim. And then on the Friday, we sometimes do a private practice rabies drives, which we've done a lot with Hillcrest Vet, which is awesome. And that's educating the upper highway area about rabies.
Welcome back to Just for Pets. You're with Dr. Carra.
Hi, Doc. It's Jackson the Jack Rossi here, and boy, am I itchy.
Are you on a hypoallergenic diet?
Hyper what now?
Changing to a special diet will really help. And Just for Pets have a massive range. And flea and tick medication, special shampoo.
Ooh, how quick can I get some?
Order today and we'll deliver pronto.
I feel better already.
Justforpets.co.za. Vet approved, pet adored. Get it all to your door.
Let's get back to our conversation on the Paws Effect podcast.
This misperception that it's a township problem.
Yeah, it's far away.
Or
And they're not going to be impacted.
yeah, my dog's indoor in the property the whole time. My dog is safe. Your dog's not safe because he's rabid animals. So any mammal with rabies, but specifically dogs and cats, we know that they behave differently. The virus enters through whatever, mucous membrane or cut, dog bite, saliva, and then goes eventually to the brain. And these animals, it's almost like zombies. Their whole behavior changes.
And it could be that they become more aggressive or more familiar.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily the old perception was
Exactly.
that, if you see all the pictures of rabid dogs as this kind of like snarling face and salivation, but that's not always what they look like, is it?
And sometimes so you get, as you say, the dumb form and then the furious form or the aggressive form. And so, that's what I'm quite loving about the upper highway vaccination drives that we're doing with some of the key vets in the area, is because it's bringing awareness to the private clients, the clients that have their dogs, but, Snoopy never leaves the house, so the vaccinations are now 5 years behind, it's okay. So by law, as we know, you've got to vaccinate for rabies every 3 years, but in these endemic areas, which is Natal, well, actually, at the moment, all of South Africa, really, it's got to be every year.
So rabies vaccinations on a yearly basis.
Yearly basis, yeah. And the ideal is that it's not just in an ideal world, we don't want you to just drive by in your car and jab for rabies. We want you to go to the vet and have a proper clinical exam. But rabies is so bad at the moment that us vets are just so desperate for people to vaccinate their pets for rabies that, we're putting these things in place to try and encourage greater awareness. So that's what we do on the Friday. And it's like I'll sit with the students and we talk about all of this stuff, like, okay, you're not happy in private practice, what else is there? Let's talk about industry, let's talk about welfare, let's talk about academia, those different options.
So great opportunity to connect.
Yeah.
And form relationships with people.
Exactly. And we have Desiree who spends 2 hours coaching with them. So they sit 8 of them. Next year it'll be a group of 12, and she talks about everything: building resilience, mental health issues, imposter syndrome, all of those very catchy terms that everyone's flying around with these days, or throwing around these days, but are so important. So the students love that. They love that, so that's really great. And then Saturday we go into the rural areas.
So describe a normal Saturday. So it's a lot of prep.
It's an early start. It's a fair amount of prep. And we all meet at the student accommodation, pack the vans. And what's so wonderful is that we have, we didn't want to recreate the wheel, you know what I mean? And that's what I loved about the way Pete had started setting it up, was he did it with welfare organizations or community members. So you're just tapping into a network. Obviously, we've always got to be careful in South Africa. You don't want to enter communities and stuff without their blessing. You know, who the random people that are just running around jabbing dogs with vaccines. That's weird. So we work a lot with KZN Valley Dogs, Cliffy's crew, Heather from MAD, Making a Difference. We've often had some of the hospitals, so the kennel assistants that join us, we go into their community, so they feel quite good because they're I'm like the
and it's actually
main man for the day.
Probably tapping into an area you would otherwise not have had access to.
Exactly. And it's not just about the rabies vaccine, because you sort of starting to educate pet owners through the whole exercise about primary health care. So we have a kit of some basic drugs that if something's really sick, we make a plan, and then sometimes poor Hillcrest vet gets stragglers taken to them for weekend treatment. So we're not like a full-on community clinic, what is it, like community service clinic or whatever, but we do some basic primary health care. But for me, the best part, and when you speak to the main players of rabies management in South Africa, so the likes of like Kevin LaRue, who is really at the top working with the government and international parties, it's rabies education. They're like, you can vaccinate all the dogs in the land. I mean, that would obviously be ideal, because it is, if you get the herd immunity to 70%, then we've pretty much we can eradicate rabies from the dog and cat population, which blows my mind that it's 100% vaccine preventable. But children and people in South Africa are dying from rabies. And how have we not managed to get this under control?
Do you think there's a disconnect because people think that rabies is a stray dog problem, and they're not going to be impacted?
So it's quite multifactorial, obviously, as everything is in South Africa and the world. But so you have the issue where the State Department is under, the Veterinary State Department has a lot of challenges. Specifically with COVID, no one was going out to do the mass vaccinations in the rural areas. So the animal health technicians were under a lot of pressure. The State Veterinary Department is buckling. So we're not getting the mass rural vaccinations like we used to. So we have an issue now where the overall herd immunity is dipping.
So why the disconnect? Is it that people don't actually connect them getting sick and your family members, because we're not being vaccinated? Well, we are obviously within our profession, but normal people are not vaccinated for rabies, so it's not top of mind. We talk about their dogs but they're not actually seeing it. Yeah. There's more discussion about the fact that there's been a case or there's an outbreak, but I'm not sure that's always been fed. And a lot of people are so tired of sort of scare tactics of this disaster and this. It's also a saturation people reach. So how do you actually tackle this to get people to understand the importance of having their pets vaccinated, or appealing to the people in those outreach areas to take it seriously and take up the offer of your work that you're doing there?
So when we talk to Stop Rabies, which is Boehringer Ingelheim's committee run by vets that is basically managing rabies across the world. And obviously, there's other countries that have it really bad as well. Their main thing is rabies education, but it's about bite prevention, dog bite prevention. Because when we look at the human cases, it's mainly children. And unfortunately, the general public, including medical human professionals, nurses, especially in the government facilities, but also in the private sector, they don't understand how rabies can be spread, which is blows your mind, but it's just what it is. So they assume that it has to be a deep bite from a rabid animal, but it's not. It's literally can be a lick. So kids get licked in the face, they get licked in the eye, they get a little bit of saliva on their hand. 10 days later, or whatever incubation period later, they start showing signs of almost like a type of meningitis. And it gets incorrectly diagnosed. And then obviously the only way that they can diagnose if a human has died due to rabies is it needs to be a full-on post-mortem where they go and test the brain for that specific, they do their test on the brain. So from the very foundation of our public healthcare education is a massive problem, because when kids or people are potentially exposed to a rabid animal, bitten by a dog, whatever, they're not getting the correct advice. So they're getting told, oh, it's not deep, don't worry. Meanwhile, it's supposed to be wash, have to go to a clinic, have to get rabies, vaccinations, and injections. Our experience of why I'm saying the private sector, there's a disconnect there, is because when we've been exposed to rabies, and we are vaccinated, all of us vets and our staff, and we phone in to talk to our GPs or the rabies hotline, we're getting the wrong information. They're like, no, you've got to go and get immunoglobulin injections. And then when you speak to the main rabies people, like Kevin Naru, they're like, no, we are vaccinated, so we only get boosters. I had a case where I was locuming in the sort of Durban North area, and a dog came from the SPCA, and it had a rabies vaccine. It actually had 2. And it was coming for a workup, and it was the dumb form of rabies. So it was this beautiful bull terrier, but her mouth was hanging open, drooling. So there we all are, fingers in the mouth. And then the SPCA vet phoned, he's like, Charlotte, we just had another rabid positive case from that same area. I think that dog that I just sent you is rabid. So now you've got to sit with owners and talk to them and be like, guys, we think your bull terrier, whatever his name was, has rabies. They're like, what is rabies? And you're like, oh, okay, what is rabies? So now you talk about rabies. Then you say, you guys have all been with, let's call him Roger. You guys have all been with Roger now for X amount of time while he's been symptomatic, showing symptoms. So we have a big problem.
You are at risk.
You are at risk. Now, same with animals, same with people. If they get exposed to the rabies virus, and it can literally be a bit of saliva in the eye, on a cut, tiny little
kiss
cut,
to the mouth,
whatever.
Yeah.
And we know that
kids.
Dogs and kids and everything's eye level and stuff. Once that, and I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm talking to our obvious, but obviously once that virus has entered a certain part and attached to a certain part of the nervous system, there is no cure.
No.
And you will die. It's the worst. It is
fatal.
Yeah, I mean, you see those videos on YouTube, the worst death in all the land.
Dreadful.
So everything starts to become paralyzed. That's why they get that hydrophobia, because you can't swallow, so you feel like you're drowning, and it's seizures. It's horrendous. And that's why it's getting misdiagnosed in some of the, let's say, government hospitals, because they're thinking it's like a meningitis. So that's also a problem, is that actually the number of positive rabies deaths, cases that have resulted in death in the human population in South Africa is actually underdiagnosed.
Yeah, and underreported. And now, a word from our amazing sponsors who make the Paws Effect podcast possible. To make a promise implies trust. To make a pledge creates expectation. And to make a commitment initiates responsibility. For more than 25 years, we have made it our mission to take the ifs, buts, and maybes out of premium pet food. That's why our experts put the best science behind our food, so your pet's health is put first. That's why when you seek value, we strive to give you more, like protecting your pets with our free accident benefits. And when you need great tasting food, our fresh meat taste delivers. You see, what sets us apart is not one thing, it's all these things combined. Because we understand that when it comes to your pet's health, you don't want doubt and uncertainty. You want absolutes, the absolute best given your means, like premium veterinary quality food of real value that doesn't cost an arm and a paw. So rest assured that any claim we make, we stand by. It's our commitment to your pets and our promise to you. In fact, we're so confident in what we stand for that we have made the ultimate promise to you. It's called the Ultra Pet Promise, 100% money back guarantee, a no ifs, no buts, and no maybes kind of promise. We call it our satisfaction guarantee. Let's get back to our conversation on the Paws Effect podcast.
So anyway, coming back to that is that this family had no idea at what risk they were at. So I then had to convince them, and it's to say, okay, the only way we can diagnose this is if we euthanize Roger, we send him off to the lab for them to test his brain tissue, and then we will even know if this is rabies or not. So I remember euthanizing that dog, and I don't know why. I think it's because I was already full on in Khula Outreach, and you're there in the townships doing all of this. Now it was on a locum, and I was just like literally crying as I euthanized that dog, because I was like, what if this isn't rabies?
Yeah, what if you get it wrong?
What if I've gotten it wrong, and now I've put down this beautiful dog, but there's literally a family's life at stake here. It sounds so like, I'm no hero, you know what I mean? But whatever, this is what vets are having to do every day. And the general public aren't aware of that. So it was horrible to say, but I was relieved when the results came back as positive. But now we're 3 days down the line. Now it's a public holiday, and I phoned the owners, and they were distraught that, one, we had to euthanize their pet. And I phoned the owners, and I said, guys, Roger was positive for rabies, so this is what has to happen. You have to go, all of you, every single person in that household, you've got kids, okay? You have to go today to go and get vaccinated for rabies,
Post-exposure.
Post-exposure treatment, and obviously it's not the same as what we vaccinate dogs with. It's a specific human.
So it's not even as though we have access to it.
We don't have access to it.
This is a different vaccine. This is a different treatment.
And it's quite expensive, and so that's also a barrier. So anyway, I phoned them the next day, and then it's a weekend, and I'm like, why the hell am I having to phone people? But I had like a sleepless night. Phoned them, I said, Mrs. So-and-so, did you? Oh no, we went to the doctor and they didn't have it, so they just, I'm like, no. And I still don't know if they ever went and did it. But
it's the kind of thing gives you sleepless nights.
Yeah, if they didn't, they were 100% exposed. That's a long-winded story, but it just shows, even with a veterinarian explaining everything from start to finish, there's a real breakdown in communication between what the human sector is advising, even what some vets are advising, and what the general public know about rabies. It's actually a bit of a chaos.
And we've had the same. I mean, when we've had post-exposure for our staff, for example, with the situation where people maybe say, I'll opt to go and have the vaccine at a government hospital, knowing that they have the vaccine available. And they're just sent away. Sent away. You haven't been bitten.
Exactly.
So, I think if you've been bitten, then there's this kind of like, oh, have you been bitten by a rabid dog? But if you haven't been bitten, that post-exposure is just not entertained. And it's frightening.
And incorrectly advised. And then you're like, okay, so again, sometimes private pet owners can be like, but that's a poor person's problem. Almost like, I'm fine. My dog has had their vaccine in the last 5 years. Snoopy never leaves the property in my lovely estate. Happy days. The problem is that it's been happening, as you know, in Upper Highway, where rabid dogs are coming into the estates because that's what they do. They behave very abnormally. And so then what happens is that private pet owners, pet gets exposed, and by law, the state vet then obviously has to put the public health risk always forefront of the whole scenario. So if you can't prove that your dog has been vaccinated for rabies in the last 3 years, that state vet has to put your dog to sleep, and it has to send it to Allerton Laboratory, and it has to have its brain samples, the brain tissue sampled. Because every other animal that is potentially, and human, that has then come into contact with your pet is then a potential future rabies case. So the knock-on effect is massive. Yeah. And then you go, this is all preventable by getting your dog vaccinated once a year. Surely it can't be that hard. But it's still a broken system.
But you're doing what you can. I mean, you've got down to leaflets in English, cartoons for children,
and that's all the State Department. So I don't want to imply that the State Department hasn't done a great job.
No.
They're doing what they can, and there's no vets, so there's no state vets, you know what I mean? So there are amazing resources. We are now working with the likes of Stop Rabies and Boehringer Ingelheim and Heels to maybe make certain little videos that we can also distribute via WhatsApp, whatever. And it's all about education. So over the next, I'm hoping 5 to 10 years, there'll be a real shift in the focus that is not just about the drop in the ocean, 200 dogs a weekend being vaccinated. It's about literally teaching those little kids, both in the private sector and the government schools, both. This is not just a government, or like a rural or a semi-rural, semi-urban issue, or this is not just a lower income issue. This is an everyone issue, and
people need to take it seriously.
People need to take it seriously and take responsibility, because your pet could be exposed to rabies and then go and potentially expose other people.
And I think what I found, Charlotte, is people think dogs because of the images, but cats roam. And a lot of people go, no, my cat doesn't like to come in the cat basket. It's so stressful to put them, and come to the vet for their vaccines. But if you think the kind of area that they cover...
Cats.
Yeah, I mean, they maybe are better at avoiding being bitten than other dogs, but it makes me really concerned.
And you get rabies positive cats. Those, I would rather probably have like a rabies positive tiger than let me not choose something feline, like, I don't know, a horse or a donkey than a cat. There was a story South Coast, a cat literally launched itself out of a bush onto someone's ankle. It was rabid, and so, I mean, could you think of anything more terrifying?
No, terrible.
And so cats also, and I won't get on to that strain of rabies virus, which is like, there is no cure for that. But anyway, so yes, cats are probably the biggest culprits in certain ways because they roam, because they
leave the garden.
They leave the garden.
There's no way of containing them.
Also, I have minimal sympathy for many vets offer home vaccinations. So it's just it's a non-negotiable, and it's crazy that it's only when a child gets bitten, and that's also the thing, is that if a kid gets bitten, in whatever circumstance, even if it's the child's fault or whatever, by a dog or a cat, and there is not an up-to-date vaccination book, you can honestly have a state veterinarian or even a medical professional say, well, that animal has to then go for testing, aka it will have to be euthanized and its brain sent off to Allerton Laboratory. So it's not a joke.
No, it's devastating.
It's devastating, and people are dying.
So the take-home message here is get vaccinated.
Get your pet vaccinated if it's Natal and Eastern Cape every year. Because we know that with vaccinations, the immunity is a complex thing, and you can't always guarantee that animal has sufficient antibodies. So with such a herd challenge, so basically with so much rabid animals flying around, make sure that your pet is covered.
And obviously you want to take the opportunity, because this is one of the things we talk about when we do the community drives, is you're getting the rabies, but don't forget the other vaccines.
Absolutely.
So despite the fact that the other diseases we're trying to protect them against, maybe not zoonotic, so they're not going to infect people, they're equally as important, because things like parvovirus can result in
really
death too.
Sick puppies and animals and adult animals that have had their vaccines lapse. And that's why I love it when we get the vet students involved, because before every drive we say, guys, you need to drive home that this is just the rabies vac, that owners must still take their dogs for a 5-in-1 or cats for the 3-in-1, and that it's not about just about the injection, it's about the clinical exam. It's about the vet checking that your animal's healthy. Because if you vaccinate a sick animal, it's pointless.
It's not going to work.
They don't get the correct immunity. So any Tom, Dick, and Harry can jab an animal. It's having the expertise to actually is this patient healthy? What is the risk, exposure factor, whatever, and then that conversation, and then the vet, finishes off with a vaccination.
So to wrap up, what is your advice what do you generally advise if you come across an animal that you think might be rabid? What is the message you give out to the community if they are suspicious that an animal has rabies?
So I think what is so hard is when the animals aren't showing symptoms yet, because we've got the most amazing big-hearted community of people where every animal that is astray or on the road or missing or whatever, everyone wants to pick them up, take a selfie, and then drop it off at the local welfare or SPCA or vet. And the problem is that in the Eastern Cape and Natal, that is actually a big no-no, because that is how there was a gentleman who passed away from Underberg. He picked up a puppy. He had cuts on his hand. It licked his hand. and then he died from rabies. From rabies. And that was a puppy that was not showing symptoms yet. So for the general public, you shouldn't be picking up any animal you do not know, even if it is on the road or whatever, with the best intentions. You're supposed to contact the SPCA because their staff are all vaccinated against rabies. They're protected. Because the problem is you go and pick up said stray puppy, it's not showing symptoms yet. You take it to, let's say, the SPCA. 10 days, this dog starts showing neurological symptoms. The SPCA is like, okay, we've got to do the right thing, do the necessary protocol, and you are none the wiser. So you carry on with your happy little life, not knowing that you have been potentially exposed to rabies. If you have an animal that's obviously now behaving strangely at all, so people are like, oh, the mongoose or the jackal was so tame, and we fed it.
That's not normal.
That's not normal. It's probably got rabies. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
So just don't touch it. If you are unable to leave an animal, then you need to put gloves on, and you need to ideally make sure you're covering it with a blanket, and
or be prepared to go for post-exposure
yes,
vaccines.
or be very much in contact with the place you've dropped it off for the next 10 to 14 days. So in the townships, what we teach the kids through these little manuals and stuff is how to not get bitten. And so we tell them, don't go near dogs you don't know. Because obviously that's a very different community. The dogs are all over the jaw. And a lot of the time the dogs are a lot more well behaved than some of the dogs we have brought into the practice, because they're very, they're not used to being socialized or handled. Anyway, so we tell them, you stand like a tree, you don't run away, you don't go near dogs you don't know, you don't touch dogs you don't know, and you've got to tell a grown-up if you have been bitten. Because a lot of the time, how kids are, something bad happens, and they're just not
going to report that.
And that is still where we have only scratched the surface with regards to actually educating the young kids, in the communities.
And you hope that they'll go on to tell future generations the same thing.
100%.
And that message will be passed down.
We have to. And then we're looking into how do we better educate the nurses, human doctors. So it's a One Health approach, which sounds easy, but it's so difficult. And Khula is definitely not at the forefront of this. We're almost jumping on a bandwagon that's already been
but
very
the work
much
you're
in
doing
motion.
is phenomenal.
I think the key thing for us is the vets. If we can get our future vets, which is essentially 150 to 200 that come through Honest to Put every year, if we can get them then going into their community service year, driving rabies education, then maybe we're going to start shifting things in the right direction.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and informing us. There's been some really valuable information there. And like you say, if people want to understand more or access resources, they can do so. There's plenty of information. And are there links through Khula?
Absolutely, yes.
That take people to the
and
relevant...
There's a rabies education certificate you can do for free via GARC. You can do a little thing, it's so cool for kids to do, and then they get a little certificate, and then you can go one step thing where you learn how to be a rabies almost educator and a vaccinator. So it's all out there.
Oh, that's great. We'll put some links to that too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really great. Well done for all the work you're doing.
Thanks, Carra. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Charlotte. Education truly is the key to effective rabies management, and the dedication of Khula Outreach in partnership with KZN's State National Veterinary Department is a shining example of how a community can come together for the well-being of both its human and animal members. Thank you, Dr. Charlotte, for shedding light on this critical initiative and for your tireless efforts in making the world a safer place for all creatures.
We have an exciting announcement to make. We are looking for guest speakers who are passionate about the pet industry and sponsors to support future episodes. Are you an expert in pet training, nutrition, or behavior? Maybe you're a veterinarian with insights to share, a pet store owner with unique experiences, or a pet product inventor. We want to hear from you. The Paws Effect podcast is a platform for industry professionals like you to showcase your knowledge, experiences, and stories. As a guest speaker on our podcast, you'll have the opportunity to share valuable information, engage with our audience, and have your voice heard in the pet community. Whether you want to discuss training techniques, emerging pet care trends, or the importance of mental stimulation for pets, we want to feature you and your expertise. So, if you're passionate about pets and have something to say, we invite you to join us on an upcoming episode of the Paws Effect podcast. But wait, that's not all. The Paws Effect podcast is also seeking sponsors to support our mission of educating and entertaining pet lovers worldwide. By becoming a sponsor, you'll gain exposure to our engaged audience and have your brand associated with the love and care that we have for our four-legged friends. If you own a pet-related business, offer pet products or services, or simply want to align your brand with our pet-loving community, we'd love to partner with you. As a sponsor, your brand will be featured prominently in our episodes and our social media channels. It is a great opportunity to showcase your offerings to a dedicated audience of pet enthusiasts. So whether you're an expert in the pet industry looking to share your knowledge, or a business seeking to reach a pet-loving audience, we want to hear from you. To apply as a guest or to inquire about becoming a sponsor of the Paws Effect podcast, please contact me at Dr. Carra at pawsandeffect.co.za. Get in touch and let's discuss the various opportunities. Thank you for joining us today. We can't wait to welcome our future guest speakers and sponsors to the Paws Effect podcast. Remember, every episode is an opportunity to celebrate our four-legged friends.